Welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. We are ready to resume the rest of the afternoon with the remainder of our talks, interviews, and panels. So let's get right into it. The next thing we have is our second and final panel of the day. We're going to be talking about the state of account abstraction. You may all have heard about the word account abstraction by now, or AA, or the EIP 4337. There's a lot of things that have gone into the full amalgamation of where things are at now and where things are going. And we're going to be doing a discussion around the state of account abstraction, what's upcoming, how it's been so far. And to have this conversation, I want to bring on our two amazing panelists, Yoav and Kristof, on stage. These two are the authors of the EIP 4337, one of the two authors of the proposal, and we'll be discussing the future and reflecting on the past for account abstraction. So please welcome them on stage. Yoav, Kristof, welcome. We're going to touch on a handful of things on how things got started and, of course, where things are headed. But one interesting and awesome thing here is that it's just been just about a year exactly since we've had 4337 go live, with the nuance in there and how we define it. So the question I have for you is, can we talk about how this has been so far and just kind of what the state of account abstraction is?
Yeah, so I think it's going well. It's looking at on-chain stats and a number of projects. So I'm seeing a lot of great projects being built, a lot of SDKs, new wallets, many projects make things that wouldn't be possible otherwise, like using the phone secure enclave, which in order to sign transaction, which has been a long time a dream of mine to see that happening. And looking at just the on-chain stats, I think there's, last time I checked, more than 3 million accounts deployed and 13 million.
That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. And 13 million user ops. So yeah, I would say it's gaining traction. And that's, but we're only just getting started. We haven't even launched the public mempool, which is probably going to happen very soon. So there's a lot going on.
That sounds like a pretty good year.
Yeah, just to add to that, Yoav, you mentioned 3 million accounts, 30 million user operations. Also, it's interesting, almost $2 million of gas has been subsidized by these things called Paymasters, which allow you to delegate gas fee payments to third parties, right? So we've seen a lot of people looking to sponsor away and abstract away the gas fees for end users to make it easier for them to onboard to their applications, right? We've actually seen, I think, quite limited use of one of the early promises of smart accounts of account abstraction, which is ERC-20 gas fee payments. Right, that's actually something that really surprised me over this past year. And I feel like it might become even less relevant moving on in the future, given how low gas fees people are expecting, especially on rollups.
Nice. Well, I mean, that's just the last year of growth, but maybe it'll be helpful for us to understand how did this actually came to be? What motivated you to create this EIP, and what was kind of the early sort of frustration points, and compared to the other alternative at that point, like why was there this inherent motivation to create a new or better standard or improve on what was out there?
Mm-hmm. So first, one important point is that it's an ERC rather than an EIP, and it's important because that's what made it unique and allowed us to start moving forward. So account abstraction has been a long time plan for Ethereum. Vitalik actually wrote the first post about it in 2015, before Ethereum launched. And since then, many EIPs were written trying to solve account abstraction. Now, it turns out to be a difficult problem, and it's really hard to agree on a protocol change for something this complicated and be opinionated about it before knowing what actually works. So what we decided to do is 4337 is to try to create it as an ERC and implement a smart contract instead of like a singleton smart contract called entry point, instead of doing a protocol change. Implement the protocol into a contract, which is slightly less efficient, but it allows you to start experimenting without waiting for a consensus change. So that's what led to this ERC, and now it allows us to see what actually works before deciding to enshrine it.
Yeah, I guess expanding a bit on that, zooming in, at least from what I recall, the way this ERC specifically started is there was a very small Telegram chat with some people from the EF, me and a couple other people, and we had some HackMD document that we were looking at how this could potentially look, and then it was just a very quick iteration and a lot of back and forth between coming up with a spec, adding some restrictions to the validation, and making sure there's no DDoS attacks, and then implementing it in a prototype bundler, and then going back and forth over and over again, being able to iterate very fast. So this is not as possible with a consensus change, right? With a hard fork, real EIP, because there you have to get things right in the first go. And so we've seen that there's been a couple entry point upgrades since this ERC has come up as an idea. And this is not really possible with hard forks, right? So I think that's a big reason we've seen the growth that we've seen so far.
So maybe I'll just kind of jump directly to you, Kristof. What is the current definition of account abstraction, and effectively, what does it let you do? Let's kind of do that by an example.
Yes, actually there's a lot of confusion, and rightfully so, between some related terms like account abstraction, smart accounts. So account abstraction, the way I like to explain it is that in the Ethereum protocol, there's currently two types of accounts. There are these so-called EOA accounts, externally owned accounts, which are the typical things you usually interact with when you use things like MetaMask. Right, these are accounts that are controlled by a single private key that you store off-chain. Right, and so you typically interact on-chain with these DeFi apps, whatever apps you use, which are smart contracts. And now the idea of account abstraction is like, hey, actually, if you look at these EOA accounts, how they work is extremely hard-coded. There's a lot of hard-coded definitions in which they were designed at the genesis of Ethereum. Some examples are like the fact that you have to pay all the gas fees in this currency, Ether, right? And you get refunded any unused gas back to you at the end of the transaction, right? And you cannot pay with any other tokens. You have to use one specific signature scheme. You cannot use things like passkeys or Face ID or quantum resistant signature schemes natively with these types of accounts. And so the idea is that, okay, what if we actually relaxed these assumptions that the Ethereum protocol hard-coded into how accounts work at the start? So with smart contract wallets, with account abstraction, the idea is to make it so that these accounts are a lot more flexible. You're able to define exactly how your accounts work with custom EVM bytecode, and that actually allows for a wide range of possibilities. You basically have Turing complete access to whatever you want to do with your accounts. You can do things like gas sponsorships, like ERC-20 token payments, use any signature scheme you want, add modules, really the possibilities are limitless. And yeah, smart accounts are just the actual term people like to use for what if our accounts are on-chain smart contracts. Account abstraction is the actual in-protocol change that makes them first-class citizens in Ethereum.
Anything you want to add? Or that was a pretty good description.
Yeah, I think it was.
I'll kind of do a follow-up to you, Kristof. So you decided to also create a company around this. And the thing I'm kind of curious about is what's that journey been like? And more specifically, were there any points in actually implementing the standard that you realized, oh, I could have done this better, or realized that there were some kinks that were just not obvious at that point of kind of writing the spec, but only kind of came in when you were implementing it? What was that transition of the research going into actually implementation?
Yeah, part of the reason, originally I was very involved in the research and prototyping side of this ERC, but I realized that my abilities do not really compare to all the people from the EF there. So I saw the most leverage I could have to actually making smart accounts a reality, making smart accounts a default for Ethereum users, was building out the necessary tooling, infrastructure, products that make it very easy for developers to get started with smart accounts. Right? It's all great having a standard out there, but if you don't have the tooling, the infra necessary for people to build on it, it doesn't really account too much. And generally it's been very interesting. Definitely the problems are a lot different than when you're doing research. Most of your time ends up being spent talking to people, whether it's sales, hiring, whether it's talking to users to develop better products, improve your infrastructure, talking to developers what they like when it comes to SDKs, tooling, what's missing in the space. Yeah, I would say the cool thing about this ERC, and the reason I didn't have too many surprises when it comes to actually implementing it on the product side, is that it tries to be quite minimal, right? It just tries to define how validation works, how you're able to call smart accounts to make sure they end up paying the validators for transaction fees. And everything else, it leaves up to the rest of the community, right? So things like modular smart accounts, things like security of smart accounts, that ends up being defined by these different ERCs that are being worked on by different teams.
Got it. We've talked about, so you kind of talked about Paymasters and how they kind of let somebody else effectively sponsor a transaction so you don't have to pay the gas as a user. Is it part of the spec here that it has to be about Ethereum, or is it that the payment currency must be ETH itself? Or can we actually pick any token here and just kind of make that work? How much of that is opinionated by the spec?
The spec is not opinionated about it at all. And in general, the specs try to be unopinionated about anything that doesn't involve protecting the protocol itself against denial of service. So it's not opinionated about validation, about the methods of validation, only about how it's called. So when it comes to gas sponsorship, like Paymasters, the Paymaster is just a contract that gets called. If you specify a contract for your transaction, for your user operation, then it's being called, and if it agrees to pay, then it pays. Now it can do whatever it likes during this event. So, for example, it could pre-charge you with USDC, which some paymasters do. So in that case, from the user's perspective, the gas payment is done by USDC or whatever ERC-20 token. And the paymaster pays ETH. So transactions must still be paid by ETH because that's how Ethereum works. But it becomes transparent to the user. You can have any logic, whether it's charging by tokens, charging by fiat, maybe you buy some gas credit with a credit card or whatever.
That's a pretty good description, honestly. The way I like to describe Paymasters, to try and make it very simple, is imagine a contract, right? Just a simple contract that is asked, hey, do you want to pay for this transaction? And it's literally, its only responsibility is to look at that transaction, look at all the data that's in it, and say yes or no. Right? So it's as Yoav said, it's supposed to be extremely minimal when it comes to the spec, but that means it's allowed to do a lot of very interesting logic. So again, things like sponsoring from, say, off-chain credit cards, sponsoring using ERC-20 tokens. You could do, again, it can be completely custom, right? Flip heads or tails, and if it's heads, then you sponsor the user operational. So it's really, really flexible.
Nice. I want to do one other kind of effectively FAQ here. How much of what we want to leverage with account abstraction here is specifically tied to having a smart wallet versus just an EOA? Is it effectively forcing everybody to have a smart wallet? Does it mean you can't get half the things you want, or we want this to be the new default? What's kind of the stance that we get to take as considering kind of best practice?
So I don't think we're forcing anyone to use anything. So if you want to use an EOA, use an EOA. But I think that as time goes, we'll see less and less users choosing that, because an EOA, I mean, so it's an, I mean, you asked how much of it is about smart accounts. I would say 100%, because it's, I mean, moving a smart account just enables you to do so many things that an EOA doesn't. An EOA is extremely opinionated. It has exactly one type of authentication using an ECDSA key. You cannot have multi-sig, you cannot have other signature types, and it has no separation between authorization and authentication, which any other security system has. We have actually, the authorization is fixed so that if you have the key, you control everything, and if you don't have the key, you have nothing. You can't do anything. And it's opinionated about how the call is executed. You cannot do batching. You only have like a one transaction, one call, and as Kristof said, it's also there's a gas sponsorship is not possible, so you have to be.
So you lose out on all those.
Yeah, so like I mean, the account has to pay the gas itself in the ETH. So it's extremely opinionated about everything, which means that it actually fits a very narrow subset of the users. And I think that in order to fit a wider audience, we need to make it abstract. We need to let different people have different methods. So over time, I would expect that this would become the norm.
Interestingly, while it is true that account abstraction is specifically for smart accounts right now, there are potential ways of making it easier for EOAs to start getting the benefits of smart accounts or starting to convert to smart accounts. Right? So there's ideas about how we could try and migrate make it possible to migrate your existing EOA account to be a smart account on chain. Right? So imagine a special transaction type or a special opcode that can convert your existing MetaMask account into a custom smart account that has any authentication, any logic that you wish, without having to migrate your existing assets, or even having to migrate, which is not possible, your soulbound tokens, soulbound NFTs. So there are examples like this which can make that transition easier.
So regarding a transition, that's something I have to comment on, that while it's a highly requested feature and we should support it, we should have a migration path. I think it is also, often it is overlooked. There are risks that cannot be mitigated, so I think this should not be the default path. It actually, this feature is geared towards, it focuses on existing users that already have an EOA with many assets and need to convert. But the next billion users shouldn't start from an EOA. They can start from a smart account from day one and not have to convert. And the reason why this solution would be superior is that if you're converting from an EOA, it means that the ECDSA key for that EOA remains valid in some places. For example, on other chains. So you claim your account on one chain and you migrate it. But then on another chain, if someone steals the key, they have access to it. And if you burn the key, then you cannot claim this account elsewhere. So it means that you still have to protect an ECDSA key, which is kind of the whole point, was not to have to do it. And even on the same chain, for example, if you have contracts that use EC recover to check the key, like with like permit. So if someone steals your private key after you migrated to a smart account and you no longer use this private key, someone can still sign permits in order to drain your account. So I think migration is an important use case, but it should never be the default for new accounts.
Just so we don't agree on everything in this panel, to make it a bit more interesting, I agree that this is not a solved problem, migrations, but I would kind of contest the logic that, okay, the vast majority of users currently are using EOAs, but obviously the next billion are not going to be using EOAs, they're going to be using smart accounts. I feel like there's quite a bit of network effects when it comes to what accounts new people coming in are going to be using, right? If most developer tooling is still for EOAs, if most existing wallets are still for EOAs, the marginal next user is likely going to be using that, even if technically smart accounts are superior. So I am definitely still very curious, very interested, very motivated to try and find paths to migrate existing users as well.
I mean, it does come down to effectively what the defaults are for the things that are actually driving a lot of the user adoption, and you kind of get to think about what is it that we want to effectively offer as a good experience. It's been a year. We've talked about, 3 million accounts so far, millions of dollars in gas subsidies or sponsorships, and the standard is not super opinionated, so does that mean we've kind of solved account abstraction? It's done. Let's just kind of wait for it to just get bigger. Like, is that it? Like, what's actually next? Can we still improve things? If so, what's actually in the works? And I guess I'm curious about like, what does the actual future look like of making account abstraction even better?
No, so I wouldn't say that we solved account abstraction. We're actually just getting started. So 4337 focuses on validation because this is the minimum viable protocol to have account abstraction with decentralization, not sacrifice things like censorship resistance. And then the protocol deliberately didn't try to define other things. So as Kristof said earlier, we are missing standards for what happens during the transaction and what execution looks like and many other things. And I think that the end game for these startups is going to be around modular accounts, which is something I'm quite excited about. And
what's a modular account?
So with modular accounts, there's not going to be one perfect account that fits everyone because people have different needs. There are different features. So someone wants this kind of validation with that kind of spending limit and wants to have session keys in order to play some game using some NFT assets or whatever. So each user is going to have its own needs. So instead of trying to find one compromise, one account that fits the user's needs, the user should treat the account as this is the user's device, the user's operating system on chain. And even if everyone uses the same operating system or even more than one, so if everyone uses the same operating system, it doesn't mean that they run the same apps on it. So I see modules as apps, and my vision for it is that eventually we're going to have like app stores. You have an app store where you can install different modules for validation and for execution, for many other things, even dApp-specific modules, like modules that improve the UX of specific dApps. There are now two standards. There are two standards working on it from different direction. There's a ERC 6900, and another one is a 7579. And each of them is taking a slightly different approach, but I think they're going to end up in a similar place, creating the user's operating system on-chain and letting the user install modules.
Just so we can, Kristof, feel free to add stuff to it too, but just so I have a better visual understanding of this thing, is a modular account a subset of a smart account or a superset, or is it an instance of it? Where does it fit in with our definition of just what a smart account is? So a
modular account is a smart account. It's implemented on 4337, so both of these standards actually are ERC 4337 accounts, but they add hooks in order to run certain things and a way to define they define interfaces for what modules or plugins look like. So in a sense it's a subset. But I think this subset is going to be very important. I think that many of them are going to be modular, and we have Safe here. So Safe had modules for a long time. So modules. The idea of adding modules to the account is not new. Safe did it before. I think that having a standard for modules so that different account implementations can share the same modules and having a definition of how the module interacts with the account, what it can or cannot do so you can safely install it and know what permissions it asks for. So, just like if you're using your phone and you install some app,
any permissions
you need to know what the app is going to do so it cannot take over your phone. So same thing for your account. So I think that extending the standard for modules it's going to bring a lot of interesting use cases.
Your original question was, is account abstraction solved? And the answer is definitely not. Right? Actually, there's still so much to build, and there's still so many problems to solve. So, some examples, there's quite a few, but some examples is just dApp compatibility with smart accounts. Now, if any of you are building dApps in the audience, please, for the love of God, look at ERC 1271. Take a look at, there's many libraries which allow you to verify signatures from smart accounts. Please use them. Please use them. I've come across so many apps. I've tried to write an article on Mirror.xyz, for example, but could not do it on a smart account. Many other examples. Please, if you're building a dApp, support smart account signatures. There's other problems like, high gas fees, right? So with 457, the validation of transactions happens on-chain, an on-chain smart contract. This is more expensive. So we've been working at Pimlico, for instance, on how can we compress the call data of user operations, making it cheaper for end users to actually interact with on-chain applications through smart accounts. There's other compatibility issues, right? How can you very easily, do things like request session keys from smart accounts? There's no standards for that right now. And they are being made as we speak, but nothing is finalized. How can you make it easier to do smart account SSO, right? Logging in with smart accounts and choosing which smart account provider you want to use. So currently, there's many examples of people embedding smart accounts into their applications, but there's been a pattern which I've been seeing, which is, every time you go to a different dApp, it actually creates a separate smart account for you. So your identity, your assets are all in different places depending on what application you're using, right? This is still an unsolved problem. Well, there's many EIPs, ERCs, like ERC 7555, which again try to standardize this, try and reduce the fragmentation we're seeing with smart accounts. So no, absolutely not solved. I feel like the SDK layer actually is doing really great. There's been a lot of very different SDKs from different teams who've made it very easy to get started with smart accounts, but there's a lot more to do when it comes to standardization, right? Getting these remaining last annoyances out from developers, allowing them to really make smart accounts just as easy to integrate and use for end users as normal EOA accounts.
No, that actually is super helpful to know, because effectively it's talking about we kind of know how we want to do this thing, but we just haven't collectively agreed upon what is the right path for it. One thing I guess I'm also curious about is, does anything change for how account abstraction works on L2 specifically, or is it just mappable everywhere exactly the same? Are there any nuances?
So L2 has been the focus from day one, because the Ethereum scaling strategy is based on actually pushing users to L2. So account abstraction for 457 was planned for that. But on L2 you could have a higher efficiency. For example, as Kristof mentioned, the gas efficiency is not great. And a lot of it is because we had to implement the consensus part as a smart contract, and that costs a lot of gas overhead. So different L2s started working on native account abstraction, and that's great. There are two such chains already, and both of them implemented a version of 437. They are based on the same validation rules, but they implemented it in different ways that are not compatible with each other or with 437. And we started seeing fragmentation. We started seeing great wallets that work on one chain but don't support another. One example would be Argent, for example. So it's so the next thing we should do is standardize a way to enshrine account abstraction on chains on layer 2s that want to enshrine it, and it's RIP 7560, which is essentially ERC 437, but instead of having entry point, it adds this logic to the protocol. So I think on layer 2,
instead of it being a smart contract, we're making it part of the VM.
Yeah, instead of having a singleton smart contract that handles this logic, it should be handled, and it makes sense because, for EOA, the validation logic is known to the protocol. Account validation is important enough to be part of the protocol. It should be the same for account abstraction validation, and that's the next thing for layer 2.
Got it. And maybe kind of my final question here is just overall, obviously we know there's a lot of still open questions here for making AA a lot more simpler, but where is kind of your time going for you as part of the EF and for you as part of Pimlico? Where do you kind of are spending the time here in improving this, and what can we look forward to?
So on our side, we feel like obviously there's always things to improve on the infrastructure side. That's actually been pretty stable, pretty usable for developers now. So we're focused a lot on the developer tooling side of things, making it easier for existing devs who've built their applications with things like WAGMI, VM, all these popular dApp building tools to migrate to smart accounts or to get started with smart accounts from the get-go. Right? We feel like that is by far actually the most high leverage thing we can be doing to try and make people switch over. We're also quite focused on making these standards that I mentioned before, things like session key standards, things like smart account SSO standards, move forward and actually get to a finalized stage so we can really have these final roadblocks removed from this usability.
Yeah, so I think tooling is really important, and we're going to see a lot more of that. And standards for the higher layers, for the higher layers, as Kristof mentioned a few, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. Then on the lower layer, there's the native account abstraction we talked about, and I think the end game for account abstraction is that it becomes native in a standard way across all of the EVM chains, including Ethereum. That's going to take a while, but we're working on it. And there are many challenges to solve that are like more technical in nature. For example, censorship resistance. So we made it as censorship resistant as Ethereum itself, but Ethereum itself is working to improve censorship resistance with things like inclusion lists. And making inclusion lists work with account abstraction is a pretty big challenge. So we have this kind of projects, and we're going to do a lot of these in the next year.
Awesome. Well, Yoav, Kristof, thank you so much for this chat, and can't wait for millions more accounts to use smart accounts and leverage account abstraction. Thanks.
Thank you so much.